In the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, we have many characters who have a huge role in the narrative, and quite obviously so. But one that stands out, and who is pretty low key amongst all these characters to me, is Yuki Tsukumo. And mostly because it's a popular opinion that's quite the contrary, with most writing her off as a wasted character. And well, if you read the title of the video, I'm sure that we're both aware that I absolutely disagree. Yuki Tsukumo is a well-built, blonde-haired woman who bears the title Special Grade, being one of 4 characters in the series of Jujutsu Kaisen to do so. This rank is reserved strictly for anomalies within the Jujutsu society with destructive potential so high that it's stated that cluster bombs may work when attempting to combat them. Saying Yuki is strong would be an understatement, so when we examine the win rates of the other 3 special grades, who seem to have won most of their fights and are relatively successful, why is Yuki the one who doesn't have a single win? Why is she the one who comes into the story to simply lose to Kenjaku and push the narrative forward and nothing more? Is this all Yuki was being built up to? Well, in this video, I'll be exploring a bit of Yuki Tsukumo's character and other facets of her, and coming to explain why I find her to be such an intriguing character who not only served her purpose, but may not truly be as useless or wasted as one may think. When Yuki Tsukumo is first introduced to the story, it's in the flashback of Aoi Todo, one of, if not Yuji's greatest mentors in the series. Todo explains that when he was in 3rd grade, he had beaten up a high schooler due to them giving him a bad attitude, and then a lady called out to him, commending his strength and asking him, "What kind of girls are you into?" This question caused Todo to state to himself that, "I had a feeling that I wouldn't be bored for long." First thing I want to bring up about this scene is that Yuki's name is never explicitly stated by Todo in her own introduction, nor does she ever introduce herself before speaking to Todo. This intro is a subtle display of her standout trait, selflessness. In a story that seems to praise and reward those who are only self-indulgent, Yuki Tsukumo, one of the strongest sorcerers, is introduced in a way that displays anything but. She doesn't bother to even say her name, but instead asks Todo a question that will reveal everything about himself to her, according to Todo himself, before she bothers sharing a single detail about her towards him. After that, we know what happens. Yuki trains Todo, and eventually, Todo takes everything he's learned from her and teaches it to Yuji, probably being the most important teacher that Yuji has had. To talk about Aoi Todo a bit here, his curse technique is Boogie Woogie, a curse technique that activates when the user claps their hands, and after the user claps their hands, the position of the user and anything they desire are swapped. They're also able to even swap things that don't include themselves, making it a very versatile ability. Whenever we see Todo use this ability, it's usually as a support function to increase him and Yuji's fighting capacity and chances of ending a battle. Todo's ability expresses his capacity to bring others up, especially Yuji, and it resembles his master Yuki a lot. Now when we first truly meet Yuki Tsukumo, she introduces herself to Geto in the same way that she introduced herself to Todo. And after Geto tells Yuki about her horrible reputation at Jujutsu High, she expresses that they don't get along due to their separate goals. Where Jujutsu High prioritizes the exorcism of all curses, Yuki wants to create a world where they do not exist in the first place, and apparently has spent most of her time researching curse energy and how to create this world in the first place. Yuki tells Geto that she's come to the conclusion of either making everyone obtain heavenly restriction, which results in the eradication of cursed energy and by proxy, cursed spirits, or making every human a Jujutsu sorcerer to prevent any more curses from being created, since everybody will be able to prevent their cursed energy from leaking if they had control over it. And this prompts Geto to suggest eradicating curses by killing every non-sorcerer, instead of teaching non-sorcerers how to control cursed energy. Before I continue, it's important to point out that the very first time we witness Yuki truly speak about herself, her own goals, it's about a peaceful world, and potentially sacrificing her cursed energy, or even more, to create this peaceful world for others, emphasizing her selflessness. And when Yuki hears Geto's suggestion about eradicating all humans, she confirms his answer with the honest truth, and doesn't go on to lie or lecture Geto for saying such a thing, but instead asks him if he hates humans. She allows Geto to vent his frustrations out and gives him a lot of emotional advice without inserting a single bit of her bias as to how Geto should move forward. After asking that question, she prioritized Geto's feelings and completely left behind the discussion of eradicating cursed energy. She's very emotionally intelligent and caring, and although her doing this does have a bad effect on Geto. She was still trying her best to help him the moment she saw he wasn't doing well. And before leaving, she even tells him about another star plasma vessel being born, so he wouldn't feel bad about failing the Rico mission either. There's a bit where Yuki says she even forgot to get Geto's answer about what kind of girls he likes before leaving, and I think that even plays into her character. She got so into her obsession of selflessness and Geto's therapy that she forgot to even get the answer that she was looking for from him when it came to what girls he likes in the first place. Now, when we're finally introduced to Yuki Tsukumo in the flesh, in the present time and all, she once again asks Geto the question of what kind of girls does he like, in an attempt to reach out to him one last time. However, to no avail, as she's disappointed when Kenjaku answers instead. Yuki continues to state this to Kenjaku. No matter what method you adopt, human beings will advance one stage higher. The next stage of humanity lies in breaking away from cursed energy. And Kenjaku, for the very first time in the series, breaks that smirk he always has on and replaces it with frustration. If you pay close enough attention, you will see that the only time Kenjaku refrains from smiling is in the presence of Yuki Tsukumo. But anyways, he replies to Yuki by saying no, it lies in optimizing cursed energy. This page specifically has Yuki standing in front of a white background with shades of black at the very top, whereas Kenjaku stands in front of a black background with shades of white at the very bottom. If it isn't clear enough, Yuki is the antithesis of everything that Kenjaku stands for, and vice versa, and this is why Kenjaku despises Yuki more than anything else. I even interpret their perceptions of the evolution of humanity being different from one another, hence, the disconnect in their beliefs of the handling of cursed energy. When Yuki states that the next stage of humanity comes from breaking away from cursed energy, the outcome becomes a peaceful world, or at the very least, a world that does not need to concern itself with curses. When Kenjaku states that the next stage of humanity comes from optimizing cursed energy, the outcome of this is a singular entity, something akin to a god that surpasses everything that came before it, and transcends cursed energy. You could say that Yuki's speaking about humans becoming heavenly restricted or learning cursed energy control, but I disagree because that isn't the primary focus of her goal. It isn't to evolve humanity, but simply protect it. The outcome that satisfies Yuki is the one where curses are eradicated, not where every human grows in strength. Unlike Kenjaku, who's actually focusing on a literal evolution of humanity. When you compare how the two perceive humanity, Kenjaku defines humanity by the greatest example of it, or whoever stands on top, whereas Yuki defines humanity as a collective. And this conveys both of their goals and dynamics very well. As Yuki and Kenjaku debate, Yuki explains that Kenjaku's plan will result in a huge amount of suffering for the entire world. And she openly states to him that this is a world far removed from the ideal that she pursues. As Kenjaku begins to talk about his plans and monologues for the entire chapter, Yuki mentions Mahito, which does display that she's been keeping tabs on everything going on in the series, despite her never being present until she was needed most. And when Kenjaku describes the calling game to her, she expresses how unrealistic it'd be for humans just to fight because they obtain cursed techniques, displaying her belief in humanity as a whole. Soon after, Kenjaku wraps up their conversation and commences the world of the Heian. Now we move forward to Yuki's conversation with Tengen. Before Kenjaku enters the Tomb of the Star, Yuki engages in a quick argument with Tengen, expressing her frustration with the usage of Gojo and Geto on the mission of protecting Riko, and says that she would have allied with the Children of the Star had their mission been to seize control of the star plasma vessels rather than kill them. Then says, I hate about talking about what might have been. I do believe that this is a huge indication of her regrets with the past events that took place with her fellow special grades, and due to Tengen's laziness and incompetence causing these regrets, she refuses to allow Tengen to have the satisfaction of communicating with previous star plasma vessels, showing her compassion for the events that took place in the past and that they affect her even to the present time, though most believe that she just didn't care. Something I believe is important to point out is that it's been stated that Kenjaku has attempted to eradicate both the Six Eyes and star plasma vessels to prevent Tengen from assimilating the star plasma vessel and retaining her form. Yet, they'd always find a way to Tengen no matter what would happen due to fate. To throw out a mini theory out here, I believe that Yuki and Gojo will foil Kenjaku's plan, but through the effects they've had on their students in the world, rather than directly like their previous hosts, maybe displaying that fate has never been broken in the first place. A little bit after her meeting with Tengen, Yuki bursts onto the battlefield to battle with Kenjaku as a part of her and Choso's plan, Interestingly enough, she points out that Choso's her type of guy, hardworking and muddy. And the reason why this is important is because if you remember Toto saying that a person's type tells you all you need to know about them, a mantra that was clearly made by Yuki, you'd notice that it reinforces Yuki's nature of sacrifice. And I'm pretty sure a hardworking muddy man is supposed to be a reference to blue-collar jobs. The jobs that lay the foundation of the world and keep it going. Choso resembles a lot of these same values that Yuki does, through all of his actions being for the sake of others rather than himself. And I believe that this is why she was attracted to him in the first place. I would also say that this is why they were both narratively chosen to stand against Kenjaku here, the man who'd sacrifice every human on Earth to simply satisfy his curiosity. When Yuki and Kenjaku begin their battle, she instantly reveals her curse technique, Star Rage. Star Rage allows Yuki to place virtual mass onto herself, and thus make her attacks exponentially heavier while increasing her strength. But weirdly enough, this ability does not increase her own defense or anything relating to it, making her pretty vulnerable. To sum this up, Yuki's technique seems to bear heavily resemblance to the wrath of a dying star, and as she's fighting within the tomb of the star, it could have been any more obvious that she'd meet her end here. And another detail of the battle between both Kenjaku and Yuki is that after their initial exchange, Kenjaku activates his domain and states, Tengen, I'm not the same as you. I have lived through this 1,000-year tug of war between feuding giants, the capricious alliances and betrayals of this world of curses. Through this, we know that Kenjaku is as ruthless and as evil as can be. He's done it all to get to where he is now, and he will continue to do what he must to move forward. In the end, he will achieve his goals no matter the means. Whereas Yuki earlier when speaking to Geto says I'm not crazy enough to do that when it came to sacrificing all non-sorcerers for the sake of achieving her goals. This does scream that in terms of determination, Kenjaku is much more willing than Yuki to do what he must. And if that isn't enough to convince you, I'd even bring up the fact that Kenjaku stated that Yuki held back the black hole she used for the sake of not destroying the entire world. If the roles were reversed, I'm sure Kenjaku would have done something riskier than keep the black hole the size of the battlefield only. He probably would have just killed Tengen to prevent the enemy from obtaining her, but Yuki is simply too kind to do this. Something else to bring up was the domain clash they had as well. Although Yuki did not use her expansion when she could have, she trusted her group, activating a simple domain, and thus, Kenjaku was able to crush her with his own. This could be headcanon, but I like to take Yuki being confirmed to have a domain expansion and never using it to convey her selflessness as a character, and if it's not the intention, it's certainly in line with it. This technique is a display of peak self-indulgence, and Yuki, sacrifice incarnate not displaying one, fits correctly. And even toward the climax of their battle, memories are shown of Yuki and Choso conversing before they decide to fight Kenjaku. They speak about Choso attempting to sacrifice himself, and Yuki asks, Choso, aren't you a necessary part of Yuji's future? You could sacrifice yourself for your little brother's future, but is there really a point if you're not in that future? And she then goes on to listen to him vent about his failure as a brother, but she just repeats herself again, and tells him that Yuji will be left alone once more if he dies. And despite this, Choso disagrees with her, and says that he deserves the fate of sacrificing himself. But Yuki, for the sake of allowing Choso to live on despite what he said about himself, doesn't let him attempt to sacrifice himself by attacking Kenjaku one last time while he's off guard, and preferred to prioritize Choso's safety by forcing Tengen to remove him from the battlefield even when she was critically injured. She leaves him with the words that you have died as a curse and now you live on as a human. In a way, Yuki makes herself a hypocrite by telling Choso to not sacrifice himself, but going on to sacrifice herself for both him and Yuji's sakes, but is still very much in line with her character. She allowed Choso to vent out his heart and soul to her, and responded with words to encourage Choso to live on. And when it came to Choso's wishes, his declaration that this battle against Kenjaku was all he had left, she still sacrifices herself for him to live on, and she curses him, telling him to live on as a human. It was, in a way, selfish selflessness, and I believe that it's very powerful that Yuki chose to do that to Choso to force him to regret his failure against Kenjaku, meanwhile simultaneously live on for both her and Yuji's sake. Yuki had the self-indulgence that her fellow special grades had, the self-indulgence of the strongest, but in her case, it was simply paradoxical. And this trait of Yuki's is what I liked most about her. Yuki Tsukumo is a character who influences the narrative and characters through a butterfly effect, and a lot of Yuji's power-ups and success in the story have come from her indirectly due to Choso and Toto's guidance and protection of Yuji. She's as selfless as it gets, and her action goes beyond her due to this. Potentially giving the heroes a fighting chance against both Kenjaku and Sukuna due to these actions eventually culminating into Yuji's exponential growth as a sorcerer. And she's done all of this within her short lifespan, in contrast to Kenjaku. Kenjaku, who seems to be a sorcerer who's lived for over 1,000 years, and has had a direct influence on almost every event in the story. To sum this up, when I see Yuki Tsukumo's actions and the effects they've had on the story now, all I see is a character who perfectly resembles sacrifice, and the story will eventually show us the value of this sacrifice. Yuki is introduced to the story speaking about sacrifice, and leaves the story sacrificing herself with an attack that has the potential to destroy the entire world for the sake of future generations. She understood that the world was much bigger than her, and her own curiosity, and chose to find an answer to a solution to the curse problem, even despite all of Jujutsu society giving her a bad reputation for not entertaining their half-assed solution to curses. And when someone needed an ear, she'd listen, and always made sure to offer advice that had purpose and direction behind it, displaying her high emotional intelligence. Through all of her actions, she's created a legacy for herself through the Jian sorcerer Toto, and allowed all of her teachings to be taught to Yuji through him. And not only Toto, but Choso as well, who's become a human due to her actions. Being forced to do his best to live to not let her sacrifice be in vain, and also by allowing Choso to pass her book on to Yuji, which will most certainly be important. To touch on a previous point, Yuki indirectly has a massive impact on the story, whereas Kenjaku is present in almost every situation he influences. Many people have said that Yuki's character ended when she died to Kenjaku, and I disagree. She's a sorcerer who's in the story to display to the audience that the world is much bigger than you, and your actions will have a greater impact for a higher cause when they're centered around others rather than yourself. Similar to Nanami's purpose as a character, she's meant to display the power of living for more than your own self-indulgence. And this is why I believe that Yuji will play the biggest role in the defeat of Kenjaku. Yuki is more than herself. She's lived for the sake of protecting others in the future, and thus, she lives on through the effects that her sacrifice and actions have had on the story. Yuki will indirectly defeat Kenjaku through Yuji and Choso defeating him with the knowledge that they've gained from her books, and with how a lot of her actions have impacted Yuji's growth. Yuki and Kenjaku's battle hasn't ended yet, and hopefully she will serve as another example as to why selflessness will always prevail over selfishness, and display why characters like her are anything but wasted.